much power should the President of the United States have? I've found myself actually asking this question a lot in recent weeks. Our nation has confronted this question itself in several pivotal moments in history before the one we currently find ourselves in. But this moment, frankly, is a little more pivotal when you have Donald Trump praising the world's authoritarians. I mean, just last night, he called Xi Jinping of China brilliant, and per usual, praised Vladimir Putin for being smart and tough. Joining us now is Corey Brett Schneider, a political scientist, professor at Brown University. He is also the author of the timely new book, The Presidents and the People, 5 Leaders Who Threatened Democracy and the Citizens Who Fought for It. Also with us is Jason Johnson, associate professor of communication and journalism at Morgan State University.
Professor Brett Schneider, when you talk about the abuse of constitutional powers, how does that entire framework change when you have the Supreme Court claiming that presidents have immunity from criminal prosecution?
Well, the warning of the book, which is about the threat of the presidency, just exploded, and the court really blew up what was always a danger into something that's so much more. There had long been a debate about whether sitting presidents have immunity from prosecution. Now the court has said that, at least when it comes to their official duties, former presidents have immunity. And really what that does is it undercuts one of the primary parts of what a democratic society is about, and that's the notion that no person is above the law.
So Dr. Johnson, Professor.
Yes.
You know, I think Corey's book really gives us some really interesting insights into how presidents sort of see their power and use their power and how they project that power. I'd like you to listen to Donald Trump leaning into some divisive rhetoric at his rally since the assassination attempt. Let's take a quick listen.
It's no wonder Joe Biden and his thugs are so desperate to stop us. They know that we are the only ones who can stop them. We're the only ones. You know, we talk about Biden like he's a feeble old guy, and he is. He is. But it's the people that surround him. I mean, he's perfect for them. This is the fascists and communists and some bad people surround him.
There's a little thing called projection.
Yes, yes.
A little thing called projection,
Yes.
which people, I hope, understand and appreciate, is a presidential superpower, is to be able to project out, you know, some things. So when he says it's the people that surround him, I mean, he's perfect for them. This is the fascists and communists and some bad people surround him. I can't help but appreciate the irony there, the fact that this really is Trump talking about himself.
Oh, yes, except for the communist part. I don't even think he knows what those are.
Right.
Yeah, look, every accusation is a confession, right? And we know how Trump operates. What I find most fascinating about this book, which it highlights, which most of us have been paying attention to for years, is the idea that the framers of the Constitution, for many of the brilliant things that they did, their core mistake was to always assume that the president was a fundamentally decent human being. And that if you actually elected somebody who wasn't a good person, they're going to get in office like, wait a minute, these guardrails are made of silly string. I can do what I want. And that is essentially what we have with Donald Trump. And now it's going to be codified in Project 2025. So it is a must that Democrats and people who care about the health of our democracy fight back, because we don't have enough guardrails to protect ourselves against someone who is morally unfit, in addition to being sort of intellectually unfit to run this country.
This is such an important point. I mean, our team found this clip from a very infamous, this 1977 interview between journalist David Frost and former President Richard Nixon. Take a listen, folks.
What, in a sense, you're saying is that there are certain situations, and the Houston plan, or that part of it was one of them, where the president can decide that it's in the best interest of the nation or something, and do something illegal.
Well, when the president does it, that means that it is not illegal.
Professor Brett Schneider, like that is what Jason was just saying, summed up right there in one clip. But the guardrails in this instant were members of Congress who stood up to that president because he was doing something illegal, not because he did not call them back after a debate, and asked him to, you know, do what was best for the republic. The guardrails were there, and if he didn't step down, they were poised and ready to impeach him. These guardrails, this current Congress, and if I'm not I'm not confident that the guardrails exist.
Yes, and that's a huge part of what the book is about, that throughout American history, we're taught in civics class that we have the Supreme Court that's going to save democracy. We have Congress that's going to save democracy. And as you just heard, the point of the book is that from the beginning, as Patrick Henry warned, those checks actually often have not worked. So think of John Adams, who in the Alien and Sedition Acts tried to shut down the opposition party, or President Buchanan, who lobbied the Supreme Court to deny black people essentially all rights in the Dred Scott case, or as you just heard, Richard Nixon, who believed the country was in a civil war and so that he could do whatever he wished. The thing that saved us, the hope, comes not actually from the court and often not from Congress. It comes from the people themselves, the newspaper editors who fought back against Adams. And let's not, of course, forget Frederick Douglass, who reclaimed the Constitution for democracy against a Supreme Court that would destroy it. Frederick Douglass, who really should be regarded as the founder of American democracy. The problem with the Nixon case was the pardon. We never got to see that president held to account. We never got to see the crimes, such as the attempted break-in at the Brookings Institution, his order to take a safe out, to rob it on a thievery basis, as he puts it on one of the tapes. These were things that we should have seen in a criminal trial, but the pardon stopped all that. So my point is that although throughout American history, and I say this in the book, we've recovered that citizens have given us hope by reclaiming democracy against Adams, against Buchanan. When it came to Nixon, the citizens of the grand jury, residents of Washington, D.C., who tried to indict that president were essentially stopped by the pardon, and we never got to see justice done. And really, that's what we've got to do now. We've got to reclaim this Constitution for ourselves. We've got to see democracy restored, not by the court, that's not going to happen, not by Congress, but by citizens in this election demanding the restoration of a democratic Constitution and saving it from what, unfortunately, some presidents have seen as an authoritarian Constitution.
You have a question,
Dr. Johnson.
Yeah, Professor.
Go ahead. Sorry, Dr.
Okay.
Johnson.
Professor, I have a quick question for you. I've got to ask this. As somebody, I study cyclical history, and I've noted that, the 20s to the 60s and the 1820s to the 1860s, the 1920s to the 1960s tend to be very, very bad times for democracy and functionality in this country. I want you to lay out to people, because you mentioned in this book that it took almost 40 years after Woodrow Wilson, before we had a civil rights movement, to push back against his racism. What is the timeline we're looking at here? What I need people to understand is if Donald Trump gets back into office, we're probably not going to live to see the other end of how long it takes to get this sort of administration out. Talk about what the next 40 or 50 years could look like in this country if he gets into office and changes the Constitution and changes our policies to make it almost impossible for him and his ilk to be removed.
I couldn't agree more. Sometimes the recoveries come fast, and Adams was defeated by Jefferson, really by the newspaper editors who fought back and demanded the expiration of the Sedition Act. But in the case of Woodrow Wilson and the nationalization, really, of not segregation, of American apartheid, that took decades, and it came at the hands, it's often credited to the Brown case, but as I think you noted, people, unknown heroes like Sadie Alexander during the Truman administration demanded the restoration of democracy in that case, but it took decades. If Trump wins, and that's why this election really is a referendum on democracy, our chance to save it, it could easily be decades before we recover, and that certainly fits with the Wilson case.
Corey Brettschneider, we so enjoyed having you on. I hope that you will join us again soon. Jason Johnson, you are sticking with us